What if the person you trusted for 50 years was a phantom? A carefully constructed lie you lived inside, day after day. For one woman, the death of her husband wasn't an ending, it was an escape. But the walls of her gilded cage were designed to hold her even from beyond the grave. Her own son is now her jailer, and a mysterious woman holds a secret that could either be her ruin or her redemption. This is a story of how a woman, left with nothing but ghosts, found the strength to burn an empire to the ground to save herself. Stick with us, follow our channel, and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single second of what happens when a lifetime of silence finally breaks. The year is 2025. The air in the Oakhaven dining room is as cold and heavy as the marble mausoleum where Richard Sterling was interred a month ago. It's a vast, cavernous space, designed not for family meals, but for the declaration of power. A mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen stretches into the gloom, a dark river reflecting the cold fire of the diamond chandelier above. At its head sits Elizabeth Sterling. She is a portrait of composure, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her posture ramrod straight in the unforgiving chair. But her hands, resting in her lap beneath the table, are clenched so tightly her knuckles are white. The only sounds are the precise, irritating clinks of her son's fork against a porcelain plate, a sound like a tiny hammer chipping away at the oppressive silence. Daniel, her son, is a perfect replica of his father in his prime. The same slicked-back hair, the same arrogant set to his jaw, the same suit that likely cost more than the housekeeper's annual salary. He dabs his lips with a linen napkin, a gesture of finality. "Mother," he begins, his voice smooth, practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to closing deals. "We need to be realistic." Beside him, his wife, Sarah, nods, her head bobbing with an eagerness that feels obscene in the sombre room. Her smile is a slash of bright red lipstick, a wound in the pale canvas of her face. "We're just so worried about you, Elizabeth. All alone in this place." "This place is my home, Sarah." Elizabeth's voice is quiet, but it carries in the acoustic perfection of the room. Daniel waves a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "It's an asset, Mother. A massive, underutilized asset. And a liability. The upkeep, the taxes, the staffing. It's a full-time job. A job you no longer need." He leans forward, his reflection in the table distorting into a predatory caricature. "We've been looking at options. For you. There's a wonderful place just north of Santa Barbara. The Willows. State-of-the-art. It's more of a 5-star resort than, you know." The unspoken words hang between them, thick and toxic as smog. "A nursing home. An old age home. The place you go to wait for the end." Sarah jumps in, her voice a syrupy flow of manufactured enthusiasm. "They have water aerobics, Elizabeth, and a Michelin-rated chef. Not that Mrs. Gable isn't lovely, but this is next level. A community of your peers, people you can talk to. Imagine the garden parties." Elizabeth looks from her son's face to her daughter-in-law's. It's a terrifyingly perfect harmony of feigned concern and naked, ravenous greed. They see her as a relic, a piece of antique furniture that came with the house, now inconveniently sentient. For 50 years she was the chief accessory in Richard's life, the perfect silent hostess standing beside him as he held court in this very room. She was an object, a part of the Oakhaven brand, Now, with the brand's figurehead gone, she's just an obstacle. An obstacle sitting on 12 acres of prime California real estate. Her mind drifts. She remembers standing in this spot decades ago, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching Richard charm a senator. He had caught her eye, winked and mouthed the words, "You look perfect, darling." Not "you are perfect," but "you look perfect." The distinction had been the thesis of their entire marriage. Her role was to be seen, to be admired from a distance, to complete the picture of his success. "It's what your father would have wanted," Daniel says, his voice taking on a sanctimonious tone. "For you to be safe, secure, unburdened." Elizabeth feels a cold, sharp thing rise in her chest. It's not grief. Grief had been a fleeting, polite visitor that left a week after the funeral. This is something else, something ancient and furious. He dares to speak for Richard. Richard, who had designed this house not as a home, but as a fortress for his ego, with her as its most prized, most powerless captive. He had burdened her with a lifetime of loneliness, of invisibility. The idea that he would want her unburdened in death is a joke of such cosmic bitterness, she almost laughs. Instead, she takes a slow, deliberate sip of her water. The crystal is cold against her lips. "The Willows," she says, her voice neutral. "Does it have a view of the ocean?" Sarah's face lights up, mistaking inquiry for interest. "Oh, yes, a spectacular one. From the communal terrace, of course. Your suite would have a lovely view of the gardens." "A view of the gardens," Elizabeth repeats softly, looking past them, through the vast, dark-paned windows at the rolling lawns of Oak Haven, the ancient oaks standing like sentinels under the rising moon. Her gardens. The ones she had cultivated herself, the one part of this estate that felt truly hers. The thought of trading that for a managed plot of pansies viewed from a sealed window makes her stomach clench. "We can arrange a tour for you this week," Daniel presses on, sensing victory. "The staff there can handle everything. The move, the packing. You won't have to lift a finger." No. She thinks, of course not. They wanted her to be as passive in her eviction as she had been in her marriage. Just a gentle, seamless transition from one gilded cage to a slightly smaller, more securely locked one. She looks at her son, at the confident glint in his eye, the slight curl of his lip. It's the exact expression his father wore when he was about to acquire a new property, to crush a competitor. She suddenly realizes Daniel isn't just his father's son, he's his father's ghost, haunting her at her own dinner table. And he thinks, just as Richard did, that she has no moves left to make. Just as Sarah starts to describe the thread count of the sheets at the Willows, a sound disrupts the suffocating calm. The distant, urgent chime of the front doorbell. It rings twice. A frantic, unseemly sound in a house where guests were always announced, never spontaneous. A moment later they hear the murmur of voices from the grand foyer. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper for 30 years, her voice uncharacteristically flustered, and another younger voice choked with tears. Daniel frowns, annoyed by the interruption. Who the hell is that at this hour? Sarah shoots him a look. Maybe it's the caterer for the foundation meeting? Did you forget to cancel? But Elizabeth knows it's not a caterer. There's a quality to the sound, a note of chaos that feels alien to this house of rigid order. Mrs. Gable appears in the grand archway of the dining room, her face pale, her hands wringing her apron. Mrs. Sterling, I'm so sorry to interrupt. There's a young woman here. She insists on speaking with you. I told her it wasn't a good time, but she's very distressed. Then tell her to leave, Daniel snaps, his authority absolute. I tried, Mr. Sterling. She won't. Before Daniel can issue another command, a figure appears behind the housekeeper. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, her face blotchy and swollen with tears. She's wearing a simple cotton dress that does nothing to hide the advanced, pronounced swell of her pregnancy. Elizabeth recognizes her instantly. Mia, Richard's last personal assistant, a euphemism so transparent it was insulting. Richard had a penchant for hiring young, doe-eyed assistants who lasted 6 to 8 months before leaving, with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. But this one was different. This one had come back. Mia's eyes, wide and desperate, scan the room and lock onto Elizabeth. She clutches her swollen belly as if it's a shield. "I'm so sorry to intrude," she sobs, her voice cracking. The sound is raw, theatrical, and utterly compelling. I didn't know where else to go." Daniel is on his feet, his face a mask of thunderous rage. "What is the meaning of this? Who let you in? Mrs. Gable, call security. Get her out of my mother's house." But Mia ignores him. Her focus is laser-sharp on the woman at the head of the table. "Promised?" she whispers, taking a hesitant step into the room. "Richard, he promised. He said he would take care of us. He was so happy." Her hand strokes her stomach, a gesture both maternal and accusatory. She finally tears her gaze from Elizabeth and looks at Daniel's shocked face, then at Sarah's expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "This baby," Mia says, her voice rising, gaining a shard of steel. "It's his. It's a Sterling." The silence that descends upon the room is no longer just quiet. It is a living entity. It presses in on them, sucking the air from their lungs. It's the silence of a bomb being disarmed or detonated. Sarah looks like she's been slapped, her mouth a perfect O of outrage. Daniel's jaw is so tight a muscle jumps in his cheek. He looks like he wants to physically throw Mia out of the house, out of their lives. His fury is a palpable force, radiating off him in waves. But Elizabeth, watching him, sees something else flicker behind the rage. It's there for only a split second. A glint of light in the storm. It's not confusion. It's not even just anger. It's the flicker of a mind rapidly processing new data, of a predator reassessing the battlefield. It's the gleam of opportunity. And in that instant, Elizabeth understands. He doesn't see a family crisis. He sees a weapon he can use against her. Elizabeth remains a statue of perfect aristocratic calm. She doesn't gasp. She doesn't cry out. She doesn't even flinch. Outwardly, she is the serene matriarch, observing a distasteful but manageable scene. But inside, a furnace that has lain dormant for half a century roars to incandescent life. The embers of 1,000,000 tiny humiliations, 1,000,000 dismissed opinions, 1,000,000 lonely nights are fanned into a blaze by the girl's desperate, calculated words. Mia's proclamation doesn't shock her. It clarifies. It's like a splash of ice water, shocking not because it's cold but because it wakes you up so completely. Richard's infidelities were never a secret. They were a feature of the marriage, as integral to its structure as the foundation of the house. They were an open secret, a quiet, constant tool of her humiliation, a way to remind her of her place. He never had to say the words, "You are not enough." He simply paraded a succession of young, beautiful women through his professional life, their presence a constant, silent testament to her inadequacy. It was a masterful form of psychological control, making her complicit in her own diminishment by her silence. As Mia is finally ushered out by a trembling Mrs. Gable, her sobs echoing down the long marble hallway, a memory surfaces in Elizabeth's mind, sharp and vivid as a shard of glass. She is 30 years old, standing in this very room during a dinner party. She is vibrant, intelligent, full of ideas. Daniel is 8 and she has been researching schools, finding one with a progressive curriculum she thinks would be perfect for his bright, inquisitive mind. She waits for a lull in the conversation, a moment when Richard's attention is not wholly consumed by the congressman to his right. "Richard, darling," she begins, her voice full of tentative hope. "I was reading about the Westwood School for Daniel. Their science program is extraordinary. I think he would thrive there." Richard doesn't even look at her. He's swirling the brandy in his snifter, smiling at the congressman, but his words are for her. He says them quietly, with that placid, chilling smile he perfected. "Darling, you handle the roses. I'll handle the things that matter." The polite laughter from the men at the table feels like stones being thrown at her. The congressman's wife gives her a look of pity, a look Elizabeth would come to know intimately over the next 40 years. In that one sentence, he had relegated her to a purely decorative role. He had drawn a line in the sand. On one side were the roses, the dinner parties, the charity balls, the soft, unimportant sphere of women. On the other side was everything else: business, money, power, their son's future. The things that mattered. And she, in her youthful desire to keep the peace, to maintain the flawless facade of their marriage, had stepped back. She had accepted her place among the roses. She had allowed herself to be pruned, cultivated and displayed. Now she looks at her son, Daniel, pacing the Aubusson rug where that long-ago dinner party took place. His face is flushed, his hands cutting through the air as he speaks. He is a whirlwind of self-righteous fury, and he looks so much like his father. The same condescension, the same innate assumption that his will is paramount. He is speaking about legacy, about protecting the family name. But all Elizabeth hears is the echo of Richard's voice. "I'll handle the things that matter." She realizes with a sudden, breathtaking clarity that Richard's death was not a loss. How can you lose something you never truly had? It wasn't the end of a partnership. It was the dissolution of a contract she had been too young and too cowed to understand she was signing. His death was not a tragedy. It was a parole hearing. And for the first time, she feels like she might have a chance to speak on her own behalf. The verdict, she thinks, the cold fury solidifying into something hard and strong in her core, is not yet in. The attack, when it comes, is swift and predictable. The moment the sound of Mia's retreating sobs has faded, Daniel spins on her, his face a mask of indignation. "See, Mother? This is exactly what I was talking about. You cannot handle this." He's pacing now, a caged tiger in a bespoke suit, his energy sucking the remaining warmth from the room. "A scandal, right on our doorstep. My God, what if she'd gone to the press, to some sleazy blogger on TikTok? A video of her crying on the porch of Oak Haven would be everywhere by morning. Billionaire's secret love child. Our stock would tank. My career, Sarah's charity work, it would all be jeopardized." Sarah, having recovered from her initial shock, is now firmly in the role of concerned co-conspirator. She rushes to Elizabeth's side, placing a cold hand on her arm. The touch feels like a brand. "He's right, Elizabeth. This is a nightmare. This girl is clearly a professional. A gold digger. She'll sue. She'll demand a paternity test. It will be a circus." "We need to get ahead of it," Daniel continues, his voice sharp with command. He's not talking to her. He's strategizing aloud, as if she's just part of the furniture. We need to take control of the estate, all of it. Liquidate non-essential assets, consolidate everything under one legal entity that I can manage. We can't have you, in your emotional state, making decisions. What if you felt sorry for her? What if you gave her money? She'd bleed the estate dry before we could even get a lawyer on the phone. The condescension is staggering. They see her not as the matriarch of the family, but as a doddering, sentimental old woman, a liability whose grief, a grief they assume she feels, has rendered her incompetent, a fragile doll to be put away on a high shelf for her own protection. Selling the house is the first and most logical step, he declares, stopping his pacing to stand before her, looming. It removes the symbol. It generates immediate capital to fight this thing. We put the money in a trust, I manage it, and you move to the Willows, where you will be safe and insulated from all of this ugliness. It's the only sensible path forward. He looks at Sarah, who nods emphatically. For your own protection, Elizabeth, it's the only way. They wait. They have presented their case, a flawless, logical cage built of concern and practicality. They expect capitulation. They expect tears, perhaps, a weary sigh of resignation. It's what they have received from her for 50 years. Acquiescence, silence, the graceful retreat. Elizabeth lets the silence stretch. She lets their arguments hang in the air, lets the words curdle and die. She feels the weight of 5 decades of silence pressing on her, not as a burden, but as a coiled spring. She thinks of all the things she didn't say, the time she bit her tongue when Richard belittled her in front of their friends, the business ideas she had that she never voiced, the life she might have lived if she hadn't been so afraid of making waves. All of that compressed energy, all of that unspent will is now hers to command. She lifts her head. Her gaze, which they had always known as soft and placid, is now clear and hard as quartz. It travels from her son's expectant face to her daughter-in-law's anxious one. She focuses on Daniel, the inheritor of the throne, the man who believes he is already king. And she utters a single word. A word she has not used in defiance, not truly, in 50 years. A word that feels both foreign and profoundly, primally familiar on her tongue. No. The word is not loud. It is not shouted. It is spoken quietly, calmly, but it detonates in the silent room with the force of a bomb. Daniel stops breathing. He actually recoils, as if she had slapped him. Sarah's perfectly painted jaw drops, her mouth forming a comical "oh." They stare at her as if she has suddenly started speaking in a long-dead language. A slow, creeping flush rises up Daniel's neck. What? What did you say? Elizabeth's gaze does not waver. She feels a tremor run through her, not of fear, but of exhilaration. It's the feeling of a locked door finally swinging open. She says it again, and this time the word is not just a sound. It is a declaration. It tastes like freedom. No. She rises from her chair, her movements fluid and deliberate. She is no longer the woman who was seated, the woman being dictated to. She is the master of the room. I am not selling my house, she states, her voice even and absolute, leaving no room for argument. This discussion is over. Daniel, Sarah, thank you for your concern, but it is misplaced. She smooths the front of her silk blouse, a simple, final gesture. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm tired. Dinner is over. She turns and walks away from them. She doesn't look back to see their stunned, incredulous faces. She doesn't need to. She can feel their shock radiating behind her. She walks with her back straight, her head held high, down the long, cavernous hall of the house she was supposed to be a prisoner in. And for the first time since she crossed its threshold as a young bride, she feels its vastness not as a weight, but as a kingdom. Her kingdom. The silence in Oakhaven, the kind Elizabeth had once craved, had become a fragile, glassy thing in the days following her quiet refusal. It was a silence that held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She knew Daniel. She knew the bruised ego of a man who had never been told no, especially not by her. The retribution wouldn't be a shouting match. It would be cold, precise, and aimed to dismantle her world from the outside in. The sound that finally shattered the glass wasn't a shout, but the gentle thud of the mail slot. A sound she'd heard tens of thousands of times, yet this one felt different. Heavier. She found the envelope lying on the marble floor of the foyer, stark white against the black and grey veins of the stone. It wasn't a personal letter. It was a business envelope, thick with the kind of paper that costs a small fortune per ream, the return address bearing the crest of a law firm she didn't recognise. Thorne, Harrington and Finch. Daniel's new legal Rottweilers, no doubt. Her hands were steady as she picked it up. She didn't tear it open with anxious fingers. She walked, with measured steps, into the morning room, the one room in the house that felt most like hers, filled with light and her potted orchids. She used a silver letter opener, a gift from Richard decades ago, to slice the top with surgical precision. The irony was not lost on her. He had given her so many of the tools she was now beginning to realise could be used as weapons. The papers slid out, cool and stiff. The heading was stark. Petition for appointment of emergency temporary conservator. The words were a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the chintz armchair, the floral pattern suddenly feeling like a mockery of peace. Her eyes scanned the document, the dense paragraphs of legalese, a language designed to intimidate, to obfuscate, to crush. But she forced herself to read, to understand the architecture of the cage her son was building around her. Petitioner Daniel Sterling alleges that his mother, Elizabeth Sterling, is substantially unable to manage her own financial resources or to resist fraud or undue influence. Fraud, undue influence. The words were clinical, detached. He was talking about Mia. He was using the girl's desperate Tear Street arrival as a crowbar to pry open Elizabeth's life and declare it structurally unsound. Foring, the recent death of her husband Richard Sterling. Respondent has exhibited signs of extreme emotional distress, erratic behaviour and significant cognitive decline. She could hear Daniel's voice in the soulless prose, his carefully rehearsed concern, the same tone he used when trying to convince a city council to approve a zoning variance for one of his monstrous glass towers. He was zoning her out of her own life. This decline has been dangerously exacerbated by the appearance of a third party, one Mia Janssen, who has made predatory and unsubstantiated claims upon the Sterling estate, alleging an illegitimate heir. Predatory. The word was aimed at Mia, but the shrapnel was meant for Elizabeth. It painted a picture of a doddering old woman, confused by grief, falling prey to a young grifter, a woman who couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook, let alone the keys to Oakhaven. The document argued that Daniel, as the sole concerned child, needed to step in immediately to protect the family assets from his mother's irrational decisions. Protect. The word was a violation. He wasn't protecting anything. He was seizing it. This wasn't about Mia. It was about her saying no. This was the consequence. She read on, the name of Daniel's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, appearing again and again. A shark, she thought. Daniel had hired a shark to declare the waters unsafe, to declare her an unfit swimmer in the currents of her own existence. The petition requested a hearing within the week. It was an ambush designed to give her no time to prepare, to find her own counsel, to mount a defence. They wanted to have her legally incapacitated before she even understood the declaration of war. But she wasn't afraid. The space in her chest where fear should have been was hollowed out, and something else was pouring in to fill it. It was cold, dense, and heavy as mercury, a pure, undiluted fury. This was not grief-stricken confusion. It was the clearest she had felt in 50 years. He had mistaken her quiet for weakness. He had mistaken her long-suffering patience for incompetence. It was the same mistake Richard had made, over and over again. They saw a porcelain doll, and never thought to check if she was filled with sand or with gunpowder. She folded the papers neatly, the creases sharp and exact. She placed them on the table beside her. She didn't weep. She didn't rail at the injustice. She simply sat, the morning light streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, insignificant particle, but together, a haze that could obscure everything. Daniel saw her as a collection of insignificant particles. He was about to learn what happened when they were compressed. Her first call was to a name she had found years ago, tucked away for a day she hoped would never come. A lawyer known for handling contentious divorces for the wives of powerful men. A woman named Evelyn Reed. Evelyn's voice was calm, professional. But Elizabeth could hear the sharp intake of breath as she explained the situation. A conservatorship petition, Evelyn said, the words clipped. Aggressive, and they're using the alleged affair as the justification. It's a classic pincer movement, Mrs. Sterling. They attack your emotional stability on one flank and your cognitive ability on the other. They want the court to see you as a victim who needs rescuing. I am not a victim, Elizabeth said, her own voice surprising her with its steel. And I do not need rescuing. I need a fighter. You've come to the right place, Evelyn replied. Fax me the documents. No, better scan and email them immediately. The hearing is fast-tracked. We have no time to waste. The conversation ended, and Elizabeth was left with the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the ordinary sounds of a life under siege. Scan and email. The simple modern instruction highlighted a glaring vulnerability. Everything of importance, everything that constituted the history and the legal framework of her life with Richard, was on paper. Piles and piles of it, stored in the one room she avoided more than any other. Richard's study. A mausoleum of files, deeds and documents. A paper cage he had built around himself, and by extension, her. And now Daniel was trying to lock her inside it. The quiet was broken again a day later, not by the mail, but by the sound of a car on the gravel driveway. It wasn't Daniel's ostentatious German sedan. It was a modest, slightly battered hybrid, the kind a student might drive. A moment later, the doorbell chimed. It was Leo, her grandson. He stood on the porch, his shoulders slumped with a worry that was entirely alien to his father. He had her eyes. Not in colour, but in their contemplative depth. He looked at her, really looked at her, searching her face for cracks, for damage. "Gram," he said, his voice low, stepping inside and wrapping her in a hug that was both gentle and fiercely protective. He smelled of coffee and library books. "Are you okay? I drove down as soon as I saw. I skipped my comp-sci lab." "Saw what, darling?" she asked, though she knew. He pulled away, running a hand through his messy brown hair. "Dad's posts. On the family group chat. Gram, he's being an absolute psycho, posting copies of legal papers, writing about his grave concerns for your well-being. It's disgusting. He's trying to get Aunt Carol and the cousins on his side, making you out to be fragile." He couldn't bring himself to say the word incompetent. So, the campaign had gone public. Or at least, family public. Daniel was marshalling his troops, poisoning the well, ensuring that if Elizabeth cried out for help, the family would only hear the ravings of a confused old woman. She led him into the house, her hand on his arm. "Your father and I are having a disagreement, Leo. That's all." "A disagreement," he said, his voice rising with incredulity. "Gram, he's trying to have you declared legally unfit to buy your own groceries. That's not a disagreement, that's a coup." He followed her as she walked, instinctively, toward the heart of the problem, towards Richard's study. The door was ajar, as she had left it. The room was just as Richard had kept it, dark wood, leather-bound books that had never been read, and everywhere, stacked on shelves, on the floor, on the vast mahogany desk, were bankers' boxes. White cardboard coffins filled with the paper skeleton of the Sterling Empire. Leo stopped in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the chaos of organised history. "Whoa, what is all this?" 50 years, she said simply. "This is what 50 years of a man's life looks like when it's put on paper." He found her there, an hour later, sitting in Richard's imposing leather chair, a single box open on the floor beside her. She wasn't really looking at the contents, old tax returns, receipts for transactions long forgotten. She was just feeling the weight of it all, the sheer, suffocating volume of it. Leo knelt beside her, his young, strong knees cracking softly on the old hardwood floor. He looked from her face to the boxes. "What are you looking for, Gram?" he asked, his tone gentle, patient. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. She couldn't tell him she was looking for the chains she had willingly put on a lifetime ago, to see if they came with a key. "Memories," she lied, the word feeling thin and inadequate, just trying to make sense of things. He looked at her, and she saw in his thoughtful eyes that he didn't believe her for a second. He saw the legal envelope from Thorne, Harrington and Finch on the corner of the desk, where she'd left it. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the tight line of her mouth, but he didn't push. He didn't demand the truth his father would have. Instead, he offered a solution.
"Let me help you,"
he said. He picked up a thick file of brittle, yellowing papers.
"This stuff, it's vulnerable. A fire? A flood? Or Dad could just, you know."
He left the accusation hanging in the air.
"Misplace things he thinks you shouldn't have. For your own good, of course."
The sarcasm in his voice was a balm. He understood.
"I can scan all of this for you,"
he continued. His mind, the mind of a Stanford computer science student, immediately jumping to a logical, elegant strategy.
"Every single page. I can create a secure digital archive, encrypt it, upload it to the cloud. You'd have multiple backups,
accessible only to you from anywhere in the world. He couldn't touch it. You'd have it all, forever. Safe. Elizabeth looked at him, at his earnest, intelligent face, at the kindness he offered so freely, a kindness he had inherited from a side of the family Daniel had long since disowned. Her heart ached with a sharp, painful pang. It was a mixture of profound love and a terrible, calculating guilt. He was offering her a shield out of pure goodness, and she knew with chilling certainty that she had to use it as a sword. She had to use his love, his skills, his light, to navigate the darkness Richard had left behind. That, she said, her voice thick with an emotion he would mistake for gratitude, which it was, but it was so much more complicated than that. That, Leo, would be a wonderful idea. The next morning the study was transformed. Leo had brought a high-speed document scanner from his apartment near campus, a sleek black machine that looked alien against the backdrop of dark wood and dusty leather. He set it up on a side table, connecting it to his laptop. The quiet hum of the machine filled the room, a modern sound overriding the ghostly silence of the past. "Okay," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Ready for Phase 1 of Operation Liberate the Archives? Where do we start?" Here it was, the moment of direction, the search. "My new lawyer, Evelyn Reed, said it would be helpful to have all of Richard's tax documents from the last 20 years, she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "And any files pertaining to the initial purchase of this property. They should be in those grey boxes over there, labelled Financials." It was a plausible, boring, bureaucratic request. Leo nodded, all business. "Got it. Financials first. This thing can chew through about 100 pages a minute. We'll have this done in no time." He set to work, his movements efficient and focused. The scanner whirred, its bright light passing over each page, capturing the ghosts of signatures, the cold finality of numbers. For hours they worked in a comfortable, quiet partnership. Elizabeth would bring him a box, and he would feed its contents into the machine. She made them sandwiches for lunch, which they ate in the study, surrounded by the growing piles of scanned documents. She watched him, this good, kind boy, her grandson, and felt the weight of her deception. She was using him, using his love as a tool. But what choice did she have? Daniel had turned her own blood against her. She had to fight back with the only pure thing she had left in this family. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, she knew she couldn't put it off any longer. The tax documents were a misdirection. There was only one document she truly needed, one she feared more than any other, but which now represented her only sliver of hope. The prenuptial agreement. She remembered the day she signed it, a week before the wedding. Richard had presented it to her in this very room, calling it a mere formality, a necessity of modern life for a man of my stature. He had smiled, his charming public smile, and tapped the thick stack of papers. "No need to trouble your pretty little head with all this legal mumbo-jumbo, my dear. Just sign here." And she had. Young, in love, or what she thought was love, trusting him completely. She had signed her life away without reading a single word. Over the years, he'd mentioned it occasionally, a casual, cruel reminder of his power. "Don't forget the paperwork, Elizabeth," he'd say during an argument. "You're here because I allow you to be." "Leo," she said, her voice steady. "There's another box. I think it's in the bookshelf behind the desk." He turned from the scanner, stretching his back. "Sure, which one?" She walked over to the built-in shelves, crammed with leather-bound sets of classics Richard had bought by the yard from a decorator. She ran her fingers along the spines, a feigned search. Her true target wasn't a box, it was a book. "He used to mock my gardening," she murmured, as if to herself, but loud enough for Leo to hear. "Called it my dirty little hobby. Said I was more interested in soil than society." Leo frowned. "Dad says the same thing. I think he's just jealous you can actually make something grow." Her heart twisted. She stopped at a row of thick, practical-looking tomes. "He had a series of books on the subject. I think he bought them as a joke." "Yes, here." Her fingers closed around a thick, heavy volume with a faded green cover, The Complete Gardener's Almanac. It was absurdly out of place among the gilded spines of Dickens and Tolstoy. A cruel joke, just as she'd remembered. He was mocking her even from the grave. A testament to his belief that she would never, ever have the acumen to look for something important inside a symbol of her own triviality. She pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than it should have been. She carried it to the desk and laid it down. Leo watched her, his curiosity piqued. With hands that were not quite trembling, but were far from steady, she opened the cover. The first dozen pages were normal. Then her fingers found the edge. The center of the book had been expertly hollowed out, creating a hidden compartment. And nestled inside, snug against the carved-out pages, was a document bound in dark blue cardstock, tied with a faded ribbon. "What is that?" Leo breathed, leaning closer. "The paperwork," Elizabeth whispered. She lifted it out. The thick vellum was cold to the touch, like a stone from the bottom of a well. She untied the ribbon, its silk whispering as it came undone. She opened the cover. "An agreement," the first page read. "Made this 10th day of June 1975, between Richard Sterling, hereinafter husband, and Elizabeth Parsons, hereinafter wife." Leo, sensing the gravity of the moment, moved away, turning back to his scanner to give her a semblance of privacy. The whirring of the machine was a low, constant drone, the only sound besides her own ragged breathing. She began to read. Her eyes, accustomed to the prose of novels and poetry, struggled with the dense, airless language. Whereas, in witness whereof, the party of the first part, it was all standard. The division of assets, should a divorce occur, a pittance for her, everything for him, the waiver of rights to his burgeoning real estate empire. It was a document of enslavement, beautifully typed and legally binding. She felt a wave of the old shame, the humiliation of the young woman who had signed this without a thought. But she forced herself on, turning the stiff, cold pages. Her eyes scanned, searching. She wasn't reading for content anymore, she was looking for a sign. And then she found it. Near the end, in the margins of a page filled with miscellaneous provisions, was a faint, tiny cross, marked in pencil. A mark she recognized. It was how Richard always flagged a page for his secretary's attention. It was next to a numbered paragraph. Article 13. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, her finger tracing the words as she read them, first silently, then her lips moving, forming the shapes of the words that would change everything. The language was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Article 13, the Legacy Clause. In the event that the husband, Richard Sterling, should predecease the wife, Elizabeth Sterling, and subsequent to his death a biological heir of the husband, not born of the marriage to the wife, is legally verified through definitive scientific means, e.g. DNA testing, all terms of this agreement pertaining to the division of assets shall be rendered null and void. In such a circumstance, the entirety of the husband's personal estate, including all liquid assets, holdings, stocks, and the sole unencumbered title to the Oakhaven residential property, shall transfer immediately and irrevocably to the wife, Elizabeth Sterling, to the absolute exclusion of any and all other named beneficiaries in the husband's last will and testament. She read it again, and a third time. Her mind reeled, struggling to grasp the colossal, insane implication. It wasn't a shield he had left her. It wasn't a cage. It was a sword. A double-edged sword, forged in the fires of his own arrogance and cruelty. He had laid a trap. He had created a clause so humiliating, so scandalous, that he believed she, the quiet, dignified Elizabeth, would never in a million years dare to invoke it. She would never publicly admit his infidelity and claim her prize. He was testing her, taunting her from beyond the grave. He was betting on her shame. Mia, the pregnant girl, the illegitimate heir scandal that Daniel was using to have her committed, Richard had known. Or he had planned. He hadn't just given her a sword. He had handed it to her, pointed it at his own legacy, and dared her to swing. A slow, cold smile touched Elizabeth's lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Richard had made his final, fatal mistake. He had assumed, after 50 years, that he still knew her. The paper felt brittle, ancient. It was a document born of a different era, yet its ink was a venom potent enough to poison the present. Elizabeth's fingers, steady and deliberate, traced the typed words of the prenuptial agreement. She had ignored it for 50 years, filed it away as just another piece of administrative humiliation Richard had insisted upon. Now, in the hollow silence of his study, surrounded by the leather-bound ghosts of his intellectual vanity, she read it. She skipped past the dry boilerplate, the standard division of assets, the legalese that felt like a foreign language. Her eyes hunted for one thing. Clause 13. There it was, tucked away 2/3 of the way through, innocuous in its placement, catastrophic in its content. It even had a title, a piece of breathtaking literary sadism only Richard could have conceived. The Legacy Fidelity Clause. Elizabeth read it once, her mind struggling to parse the dense legal phrasing. She read it again, and the meaning settled over her not like a wave, but like a sheet of ice. It was a contingency plan, a time bomb. The clause stated that in the event of a verified biological heir of Richard Sterling being produced and proven outside the sanctity of their marriage, the standard structure of inheritance would be rendered null and void. Her breath caught. The family trust, the vessel containing the sprawling architecture of Sterling Enterprises, would still pass to their son, Daniel. Richard would never risk his business empire. It was his true child, the only offspring he had ever truly respected. But everything else, everything personal— Elizabeth's eyes scanned the words, her heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. The entirety of Richard's vast personal fortune the liquid stocks that flowed like rivers through the markets, the fortress of bonds, the shadowy offshore accounts that existed only as numbers on a screen, and most importantly, the sole, unassailable title to the Oakhaven estate, and every painting, every book, every teaspoon within its walls would transfer immediately and irrevocably to his wife Elizabeth Sterling. It wasn't a gift. It was a cage of a different design, a cage built of shame. He had constructed a perfect trap, designed by a narcissist so confident in his own power that he believed he could control her even with the ultimate betrayal. He had assumed, with the smug certainty that had defined their 50 years together, that she would never, ever choose public humiliation over private wealth. He was certain she would rather accept a smaller shared inheritance, a dignified portion handed down by her son, than stand before the world and admit that her husband had fathered a child with another woman. The scandal, he believed, would be a price she was unwilling to pay. He thought the title of the grieving, respectable widow was the only one she would ever want. A low, humorless sound escaped Elizabeth's lips. It was a dry, rusty thing, the sound of an unused faculty. Laughter. He never imagined this. He never imagined that the scandal wasn't a price, but a reward. He never imagined that she would not just accept it, but welcome it. That she would run toward the flames of public disgrace if it meant burning down the prison he had built around her. She looked up from the page, her gaze falling on the large, oil-painted portrait of him that hung over the fireplace. He was smiling. Not a warm smile, but a knowing one. The smile of a man who always believed he was the smartest person in any room. "You fool," she whispered to the portrait. "You arrogant, beautiful fool." He hadn't just built her a cage. He had forged her a sword, believing she would always be too afraid, too well-trained, too ashamed to ever pick it up. He had mistaken her silence for weakness. For 50 years, he had been wrong. The realization settled deep in her bones. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't about fending off Daniel and his grasping wife. This was about justice. A strange, twisted, posthumous form of it. The document in her hands was his final act of control, and it would become her first act of liberation. But a sword was useless without the strength to wield it. And she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't do this alone. The legal battle would be one front, but the war for the truth required a different kind of soldier. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the contacts, scrolling past Daniel, past the society friends who were no more than ghosts. She found the one name that represented not the past, but a possible future: Leo. Her finger tapped the screen. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice bright and concerned. "Graham, is everything okay?" "Leo," she said, and her own voice surprised her. It was devoid of the tremor she had lived with for years. It was firm, solid, the voice of a woman who had just been handed a weapon. "I need a favor, a very big one, and I need you to trust me, even if what I ask seems strange." There was a pause on the other end, but not one of hesitation. It was a pause of consideration. "Always, Graham. You know that. What do you need?" This was the risk, the true risk, pulling him into this cesspool, staining his goodness with the family's filth. But she had no choice. Daniel had left her with no choice. Richard had left her with no choice. "I need you to find out everything you can about Mia, the young woman who came to the house." "About the baby?" Leo asked, his voice lowering. About everything, Elizabeth clarified. I don't want gossip. I don't want the things she's posted on her public Facebook or Instagram. I need to know who she really is, where her money comes from, who her friends are. I need the truth, Leo, not for me, not for your father, for the truth itself. It's the only thing that matters now. Graham, if Dad finds out I'm doing this... He won't, Elizabeth said, her voice like steel. This is between you and me, an alliance. Can you do it? Another moment of silence, and then the sound of a keyboard clicking softly in the background. I'm on it, Leo said, his voice now laced with a quiet determination that was so unlike his father's bluster. Consider it done. She hung up the phone and felt the first tremor of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, it was hope. A dangerous, sharp-edged thing. Leo worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a fierce, protective love for his grandmother. The public-facing profiles for Mia Sanchez were exactly what one would expect. Carefully curated, blandly aspirational. Pictures of sunsets, avocado toast, a new handbag. It was a digital facade, a wall built to be looked at, not seen through. Amateurs would stop there. Leo was not an amateur. He started by running her name and known email addresses through data breach archives. It gave him old passwords which were useless for logging in, but invaluable for seeing patterns. People are lazy. They reuse usernames. He found a hit, an old, forgotten username. Meerkat Plays. He plugged it into Twitch. Bingo. An account, dormant for 2 years. The videos were still there. Hours of her playing video games, her voice younger, her face less guarded. He scrubbed through them, listening to the background chatter, the names she mentioned. He cross-referenced them, building a map of her social circle from a time before she learned to build walls. That led him to a locked Instagram account. He couldn't get in, but he didn't need to. He could see the tagged photos from her friends' public accounts. Photos from before she started scrubbing her digital footprint, and in the background of a group photo from a New Year's Eve party 2 years ago, he saw him, his father, Daniel, standing just a little too close to her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Leo's blood ran cold. He dug deeper, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He moved from social media to financial apps. It was a long shot, but sometimes people were careless. He searched for public transactions on Venmo using her known phone number and email. He found it. A stream of payments. Not from Richard Sterling, from Daniel Sterling. His father's profile picture, a smug photo of him on a golf course, stared back at Leo from the screen. The transactions went back over a year. The public memos attached to them were meant to look innocuous. Dinner, gas money, helping out. But then Leo switched the privacy filter on the site, a simple trick, to see if there were any transactions she had made public herself. There were. Mixed in with payments from her friends for pizza and movie tickets were payments from his father with different, more intimate labels. Our getaway. For that dress you liked. And then one from 6 months ago. The one that made the air leave Leo's lungs in a single painful gasp. For the little bean. His hands were shaking. He felt sick. It wasn't just an affair. It was a long-term, calculated deception. He kept digging, his movements now frantic. He used the geodata from the old Instagram posts, the date from the Our Getaway transaction. He found it. A photo album on a friend's obscure photo-sharing site, the privacy settings left on public by mistake. The album was titled Carmel Fun. The pictures showed a group of friends on a weekend trip, and there, in multiple photos, were Mia and Daniel, kissing on the beach, holding hands at a restaurant, his father's arm wrapped around her. Mia looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration. It wasn't Grandad. It was never Grandad. He stared at the screen, at the smiling face of his father, and the pregnant young woman his family was trying to destroy. The whole thing was a lie, a monstrous, intricate lie. His father wasn't protecting the family from a gold digger. He was trying to clean up his own mess, using his own mother as collateral. He snatched his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He called her. Elizabeth answered on the first ring, as if she had been sitting by the phone, waiting. "Gram." Leo's voice was a choked whisper. He couldn't get the words out. The betrayal felt like acid in his throat. "Leo, what is it? What did you find?" He took a shaky breath. The image of the photograph burned into his mind. "Gram, the baby, Mia's baby." He paused, forcing the words out. "It wasn't Grandad, it was Dad. It was always Dad." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was not the silence of shock or confusion. It was the silence of a final puzzle piece clicking into its terrible, perfect place. Elizabeth sat in the dark of the study long after the call with Leo ended. The phone lay on the polished mahogany of the desk, a silent black monolith. Leo's words didn't echo, they resonated, vibrating through the very foundation of the house, through the marrow of her bones. It wasn't Grandad, it was Dad. The pieces didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a tectonic collision, rearranging the entire landscape of her past. Richard wasn't just a cheat. Daniel wasn't just greedy. The reality was so much more monstrous, so much more elegantly cruel. Richard wasn't the victim of this affair. He was its architect. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawns of Oakhaven, now illuminated by the cold, impartial light of the moon. He must have known. The thought was as clear and as sharp as a shard of glass. Richard, with his network of spies and his obsessive need to know every whisper within his domain, could not possibly have been ignorant of his own son's affair with his personal assistant, happening right under his nose. He would have seen the stolen glances, the hushed phone calls. He would have known. And he did nothing to stop it. No, that wasn't right. He did more than nothing. He nurtured it. He cultivated it like one of his prized poisonous orchids. He must have watched Daniel, his disappointing, grasping son, fall into a trap of his own making, and saw not a betrayal, but an opportunity. An opportunity for one last, grand performance. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying clarity. Richard orchestrated this. All of it. From beyond the grave, he was still pulling the strings. He manipulated Mia, a young woman entangled with a powerful, married man. He let her believe whatever she needed to believe. Perhaps he even encouraged the delusion, subtly hinting, planting seeds of doubt about Daniel's commitment. presenting himself as a more stable alternative. He let her believe the child was his. Why? Because he knew about Clause 13. He knew his own prenuptial agreement better than anyone. He knew that a verified biological heir would trigger the clause. He had to be sure she would show up. He had to be sure the claim would be made. He timed his own death. Perhaps not literally, but he had prepared for it, knowing this story would only unfold once he was gone from the stage. It was a test, a final, diabolical examination of his family's character, a test he had designed for them all to fail. He knew Daniel's greed would drive him to try and silence Mia, to seize control from his grieving, incompetent mother. He knew Daniel would be too arrogant to ever confess the truth. He knew Elizabeth, he thought, would be too proud and too broken to ever fight back, that she would shrink from the scandal and allow herself to be managed. He set them on a collision course, lit the fuse, and then exited the stage, waiting in the wings of eternity to watch the explosion. He didn't just want to control them in life. He wanted their ruin to be his final, lasting legacy. He wanted to burn the whole theatre down with the cast still inside. A cold, hard fury, unlike anything she had ever experienced, rose in her chest. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of a wound. It was the cold, dense anger of forged steel. Her fight had changed. It was no longer just a struggle for her house or her freedom. It was a war against his ghost, a war to dismantle the rotten, corrupt machine he had built. She turned from the window and looked back at his portrait over the fireplace. The knowing smile seemed to mock her. "You wanted a performance, Richard?" she said to the silent room. "You'll get one. But the ending will be mine." The next morning, her instructions were precise. She made a single phone call to her new lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Anita Singh, who had been recommended as someone who understood complex family dynamics and had a spine of solid rock. Then she made a call to Daniel's lawyer. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of a woman who has conceded. "Please inform my son," she said, "that I am ready to discuss the terms of the conservatorship. I would like to hold a final meeting at the house tomorrow afternoon to settle things." The trap was set. The following day, the air in the Oakhaven dining room was thick with anticipated victory. Daniel and Sarah arrived first, sweeping in as if they already owned the place. Daniel was dressed in a suit that was a size too tight, a poor imitation of his father's power. Sarah's smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. Their lawyer, a man with a shiny suit and an equally shiny smile, followed them, carrying a briefcase full of what Elizabeth knew were surrender documents. Daniel walked directly to the head of the long, polished table, his father's seat, and sat down without hesitation. It wasn't a request for permission, it was an occupation. "Mother," he began, his tone dripping with condescending magnanimity, "I'm glad you finally decided to see reason. This is for the best, for the whole family." Elizabeth, seated to the side with Anita, simply inclined her head. She let him talk. She let the arrogance fill the room, let it swell and press against the walls like a toxic gas. A moment later, the doorbell rang. A few minutes passed, and the housekeeper showed in the final guest, Mia Sanchez. She was pale, her pregnancy now obvious beneath her simple dress. She looked terrified, a lamb brought into a den of wolves. She saw Daniel, and a flicker of something crossed her face. Hope? Fear? He refused to meet her eyes. Instead, he gestured dismissively in her direction. "Once the paperwork is signed," Daniel said, his voice loud, performative, "we can deal with this situation. We will be generous, of course, but this absurdity must end. Mia flinched as if struck. She clutched her handbag and sat in the chair Elizabeth had instructed the housekeeper to place for her, set away from the main table, as if she were a spectator, as if she weren't the catalyst for the entire charade. Elizabeth watched her son. She watched him preen, watched him posture in his father's chair, wielding a power he had not earned and did not understand. She felt a profound, empty coldness. The last vestiges of maternal sentiment had been burned away, leaving only the hard, clean lines of purpose. She let the silence stretch after he finished speaking. She let him bask in it, savouring his triumph. Then she caught the eye of her lawyer. Anita, who had been observing the entire scene with the placid focus of a hawk, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The overture was over. The performance was about to begin. The air in the Oakhaven dining room was thick enough to be carved. It was a silence made of polished mahogany, crystal glasses, and the suffocating weight of 50 years of unspoken truths. Daniel sat with his lawyer, a man named Peterson, whose face was a mask of placid corporate confidence. They both radiated a smug certainty, the relaxed posture of victors who were merely waiting for the formalities to conclude. Across the vast table, Sarah sat beside her husband, a hand resting on his arm, her expression a careful blend of wifely support and triumphant greed. Mia was there too, positioned at the far end of the table like a piece of evidence, her gaze fixed on her own trembling hands in her lap. She looked small, lost, a pawn in a game whose rules she was only just beginning to understand. Elizabeth sat straight-backed, a marble statue amidst the turmoil. Beside her, her lawyer, Anita, a woman with sharp eyes and a demeanour that conceded nothing, calmly arranged a slim folder on the table. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper. Daniel cleared his throat, a theatrical sound meant to take command of the room. "Well," he began, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Now that everyone is present, perhaps we can expedite this unfortunate business. My mother's condition makes this a regrettable but necessary step. The conservatorship is purely a measure to protect the estate from opportunistic claims." He flicked a dismissive glance towards Mia, who flinched as if struck. Anita let the silence stretch for a moment after he finished, a deliberate, calculated pause that made Daniel's bravado seem flimsy. Then she spoke, her voice clear and cutting. "Before we address the entirely baseless petition for conservatorship, Mr. Sterling, there is a prior matter to address. The matter of your father's prenuptial agreement with your mother, executed on May 12, 1975. Daniel waved a hand. "Ancient history. Irrelevant. We're talking about present capacity." "On the contrary," Anita said, her eyes not leaving his, "it is profoundly relevant. Specifically, Article 13. She opened the folder, her movements precise. The document inside was old, the paper yellowed at the edges, the typewritten font a relic of a bygone era. "I will read it aloud for the record." She didn't wait for permission. Her voice filled the room, each word landing with the force of a hammer blow. Article 13, the Legacy Clause. In the event of my, Richard Sterling's death, should a biological heir not born of my legal union with Elizabeth Sterling be verifiably proven to exist, the entirety of my personal fortune, including all liquid assets holdings, stocks, bonds, and sole unencumbered title to the Oakhaven estate and all properties therein, shall bypass any and all previously stipulated testamentary directions and transfer immediately and irrevocably to my wife, Elizabeth Sterling. The room fell silent once more, but this was a different kind of quiet, It was the sound of a predator's trap springing shut. Daniel's smug expression dissolved, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then into a mask of pure, white-hot rage. His face became blotchy, a vein throbbing in his temple. "What? That's preposterous! That's insane!" he sputtered, his voice cracking. He lunged forward slightly in his chair, his knuckles white where he gripped the table's edge. "He would never! My father would never sign something so suicidal. It's a forgery." Elizabeth, who had been silent throughout, finally moved. She turned her head, her gaze as cool and unyielding as a winter sky. It was the first time she had looked directly at her son all morning. "Oh, but he would, Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an astonishing weight. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and had therefore gained an unbreakable strength. He did. It was his final, perfect little joke, his ultimate test. She let that hang in the air, a poisonous little dart. Then she shifted her gaze, slowly, deliberately, from her son to the pale, terrified girl at the end of the table. "The clause is quite clear," as Anita read. "It is triggered by the arrival of my husband's illegitimate heir." Mia looked up, a flicker of something, hope, justification, in her wide, tear-filled eyes. Daniel's lawyer, Peterson, was already starting to formulate an objection, a challenge to the paternity, a demand for DNA tests. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elizabeth wasn't finished. She held the room captive with her stillness. She let the weight of the moment settle, letting her son and his wife savor what they believed was a stunning, if bizarre, victory for her and a complication for them. She allowed them to think they understood the battlefield. Then she turned her head back, her eyes locking onto Daniel's. And she delivered the killing blow. "But the thing is, Daniel," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, a tone that was far more terrifying than any shout. "Mia isn't pregnant with my husband's child." The air crackled. Daniel's rage faltered, replaced by a new, dawning horror. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened, her nails digging into his expensive suit. Elizabeth reached for a second, thicker folder that Anita slid silently in front of her. With a steady hand, she pushed it across the polished surface of the table. It slid a few feet and came to a stop directly in front of her son. The sound it made was soft, but it echoed in the silence like a gunshot. "She's pregnant with yours." Her eyes never left his. They were 2 chips of ice. "Congratulations on the baby, son." For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was a tableau of ruin. Daniel stared at the folder, as if it were a venomous snake. Then, with a trembling hand, he opened it. The contents spilled slightly onto the table. Printouts of Venmo transactions, dozens of them, sent from his account to Mia's. The memo lines, once private little jokes, were now damning evidence. "For our little secret. Carmel Getaway Fund. For the best assistant." Then came the photographs. Not office photos. Grainy, long lens shots taken by the investigator Leo had hired. Daniel and Mia walking hand in hand on a beach in Carmel, their faces close. A shot of them kissing outside a motel, their bodies pressed together. screenshots of text messages, flirtatious, then desperate, then conspiratorial. A digital trail of deceit, clear and irrefutable. The room exploded. It wasn't a sound, it was a detonation of a family. Sarah was the first to break. A choked, guttural noise ripped from her throat, a sound of pure animalistic fury. "You son of a bitch!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of the supportive wife shattering into a million pieces. She lunged across the small gap between them, her nails raking at his face. "You did this with her, in our life. You used his death." Daniel recoiled, trying to bat her away, shouting denials that were lost in her screaming. Peterson, his lawyer, sat frozen, his mouth agape, his professional composure utterly vaporized. He was looking at the complete and utter incineration of his client's case and future. At the end of the table, Mia finally dissolved completely. Sobs racked her body, great gulping gasps of air. "He knew," she cried, her words tumbling out between sobs, addressed to no one and everyone. "Richard, he knew. He knew about us. He didn't stop it. He encouraged it. He told me he would take care of us, that he would claim the baby as his own to protect the family line from Daniel's terrible wife. He said it was the only way. He said he was using me to teach Daniel a lesson. He used me." Her confession was the final shovelful of dirt on the Sterling family coffin. It laid bare the entire monstrous truth. Richard hadn't just set a trap for his wife. He had set a trap for his son, using Mia as the bait. A posthumous act of psychological warfare, designed not to test his family, but to utterly annihilate them. To burn it all to the ground from beyond the grave. The foundation of the Sterling dynasty, built on Richard's iron will and Elizabeth's silent sacrifice, turned to dust in a matter of seconds. Sarah's shrieks, Daniel's panic denials, Mia's hysterical sobs, and the frantic attempts by the lawyers to restore some semblance of order all blended into a cacophony of ruin. And in the centre of the storm, Elizabeth sat, silent, still, the architect of this destruction, and its sole survivor. The days that followed were a wasteland of silence. The chaos of the dining room had receded, leaving behind an echoing emptiness. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. The conservatorship case was laughed out of court, dismissed with prejudice. Daniel, exposed and humiliated, was financially and socially obliterated. The story, leaked from a dozen different sources, was a feast for the city's gossip columns. Sterling heir's secret love child in vicious estate battle. His business partners deserted him. His friends stopped returning his calls. Sarah had filed for divorce the very next day, her petition citing adultery and extreme cruelty, her lawyers circling the carcass of Daniel's reputation like vultures. They would pick him clean. Mia, a casualty in a war waged by 2 generations of monstrous men, had simply vanished. Her lawyer had informed Anita that she had accepted a private, generous settlement from Elizabeth, enough to start a new life far away from the wreckage, and had disappeared without a trace. Elizabeth was left the sole undisputed owner of a vast fortune and a house filled with ghosts. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps soft on the thick Persian rugs. For 50 years this house had been her world, her prison. Now it was just property. She ran a hand over the cool marble of the mantelpiece in the grand drawing room, the very spot where she had been forced to stand and smile through countless parties, a decorative object in her own life. There was no joy in the memory, only the faint echo of a chain breaking. She moved into Richard's study. The scent of his cigars and leather still clung faintly to the air, a phantom of his oppressive presence. This was the heart of his power, the room from which he had controlled their lives. She stood before his enormous desk, the one where he had penned the very clause that had become his undoing and her liberation. She imagined him there, a smirk on his face, crafting his cruel test, so certain of her weakness, of her fear of scandal. He had never once considered that she might find the strength to burn down the prison rather than inherit its keys. He had forged her a sword, believing she would only ever see it as a burden. She walked upstairs past the master bedroom they had shared, a space that had grown colder and wider with each passing year of their marriage. She didn't enter. There was nothing for her in there. She found herself in the garden, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. She stood by the rose bushes, the ones she had tended to with a devotion that was really just a search for a small corner of beauty in a life devoid of it. She looked at the bench where she had sat to read the prenuptial agreement, the cruel irony of Richard hiding it in a book about gardening, not lost on her. There was no triumphant laughter. There was no surge of victory. As she stood there looking out over the sprawling estate that was now entirely hers, she felt only a profound, hollowed-out peace. It was the strange, empty calm that follows a necessary amputation. She had cut away a part of herself, her son, the life she had known, the very definition of who she was, for 5 decades, in order to survive. The loss was immense, a phantom limb that would ache for a long time. But for the first time since her wedding day, the air she breathed felt clean. It felt quiet. It felt entirely her own. Time began to move differently. The urgent, frantic pace of the preceding weeks slowed to a gentle, deliberate rhythm. Summer gave way to the crisp air of fall, and fall bled into a winter that felt less like an ending and more like a cleansing. The Oakhaven estate, with its ghosts and its grandeur, was put on the market. Elizabeth oversaw the process with a detached efficiency. She watched as removal trucks, like giant insects, carried away the furniture that had been the scenery of her confinement. The contents were auctioned off, scattered to the 4 winds, their history and significance dissolving into mere monetary value for strangers. The house itself sold quickly to a tech mogul, who planned to gut it and install a home theatre and an infinity pool. Elizabeth felt nothing watching him sign the papers. She was not selling a home. She was closing a museum dedicated to a life she no longer lived. Every last cent of Richard's legacy, the fortune he had used as a weapon, was funneled into a single purpose. On a quiet Tuesday in early spring, Elizabeth sat in a modest law office and signed the final documents. The Elizabeth Sterling Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Abuse was born. It was an act not of charity, but of justice. A transformation of poison into medicine. The final scene of her old life did not find her in a mansion. It found her on the balcony of a modest, sunlit apartment overlooking the vast, calming expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The space was small but bright, filled with light and air. Instead of acres of professionally tended gardens, she had a small collection of potted roses on the balcony, their blossoms of vibrant, defiant crimson. She was carefully snipping away a dead leaf, her movements focused, peaceful. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. It was not a lawyer, not a reporter, not a summons from a life of conflict. She picked it up, a message from Leo. It was a picture, slightly blurry, of a brilliant orange and purple sunset, clearly taken from a university dorm room window. The caption underneath read, "Thinking of you, Graham. I'm so proud of you." A smile, genuine and unburdened, touched Elizabeth's lips. It reached her eyes, which reflected the endless blue of the ocean in front of her. The hollow space inside her, the space left by the amputation, was beginning to fill with something new. Something quiet and strong. She looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky. She was not Richard Sterling's widow. She was not Daniel's defeated mother. She was not a matriarch, a victim, or a victor. She was just Elizabeth. And she was finally, unequivocally, free. Elizabeth's story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Her journey from a silent captive to a free woman was fueled by a strength she didn't know she had. We all have that strength within us. What part of Elizabeth's story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know about a time you found unexpected strength to change your own story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and liberation.